Now, I want to start with something that's a little taboo. It's a little unusual when you're meeting someone for the first time, but I want to ask you how old you are. Okay, now before you judge me and think, wow, how rude is that, I want you to remember, you ask people how they got their way when they were children when you first met them. So what's more invasive? You decide. But what I really want to know is how old are you-ish? Okay, what generation do you come from? So grab your clickers, and let's take a second and answer this. What generation do you represent? We've got four here. Silent generation, born between 1925 and 45. Most should be retired, but you might be here. So B, baby boomers, Gen X, and Gen Y or millennials. So take a second and let us know what you represent. And you might want to cover it up so your neighbor doesn't know how old you really are. No, I'm a millennial. Yeah. Very good. Okay, so it looks like we're split here, and this is what I suspected. 44% here, both on baby boomers as well as Gen X, and we've got 11% of you, youngins like me, that are millennials. So here's what I wanted to do. There's been a lot of discussion over the last couple of years about generations in the workplace. Right? A lot of discussion about we've never had this many generations in the workplace all at once. Some people are calling it a generational gap. Even at VitalSmarts, we've been doing research lately around the generational divide. Earlier this year, Joseph and David did a little research where they found that for more than a third of us, we waste more than 5 hours a week because of unaddressed issues between two people in different generations. So it's a little bit of a problem that we're trying to solve. And so I took an interest in the subject and thought, I want to know what the experts are saying are the best practices to step into this problem and really find an effective solution. And here's the funny thing. Most of what I read came down to one thing. It was all about the millennials. It was how do we manage them? How do we understand them? How do we get them off the stinking phone, right? It was all of that stuff, okay? And so what I want to show you a little bit is a summary of what I learned about my generation, at least what the literature is saying about us. And there were three terms that came up over and over again. The first is we're entitled, okay? We're entitled. Some people have called us the trophy generation. Now, some of you are saying, well, I mean, that's not a bad thing. Trophies are synonymous with success and you accomplish great things. It turns out we were a little different. And I was reminded back to a time when I was about 9 years old and I was playing on a soccer team, community soccer league, and the season was over, and the assistant coach came to me, brought this box, and he opened it up and he pulled out this beautiful trophy, gold little soccer player on the top. And the plaque in the front said simply, MVP. I mean, I was proud, right? Of course I was the MVP. I knew I was the MVP. And then as my assistant coach moved away, I looked over at the other teammates of mine, and the other coaches were opening similar boxes and pulling out small trophies, same little gold soccer player on the top that also said MVP. You get where I'm going with this. For my generation, trophies aren't as much about excellence as they are about showing up, okay? And what's interesting about this, there's a gentleman named Mark Taylor who's been studying generations in the learning environment. And what he says for millennials, we went into high school expecting high grades, in his words, for very little effort and sometimes just for showing up, just for breathing. And now that we're in the workplace, to his words, he says we ask not what we can do for our organizations, but what our organization can do for us. And 40% of us, it turns out, think that we should get promoted every 2 years independent of our performance. Wouldn't that be nice? Now, here's the tough part, too, about my generation. If we don't get that promotion, you might get a call from our mommies, okay? So just a heads up around there. We're entitled. Secondly, we're very self-interested. We're self-involved. We take these selfies. We post them on our favorite social media site. And I'm not going to lie, when I was up here practicing earlier, I took one. But we take these and we post them on our social media sites and wait for people to like them or comment because we're looking for that affirmation, that self-esteem. And so we're very, very self-involved. Actually, there was an article written a couple years ago by Time Magazine called the Me, Me, Me generation. And they talked about how how common narcissistic personality disorder had become among millennials. They said it was 3 times more common among this generation than past generations when they were our age. We think a lot of ourselves, but unfortunately, that may not be very accurate. Though we think we can do everything, there was another research study I was reading. It's called the American Freshman Survey. They do it every year from 1966, and they try to ask freshmen to rate themselves compared to their peers. And what they found is, quote, an unprecedented level of self-infatuation, close quote. So we think we're really great and we can do anything, and yet what they ended the study by saying is we find a large disconnect between what millennials think they can do and what they can actually do. So we think we're really great, and yet we lack a lot of the skills to accomplish some of that. So we're a little self-involved and think too much of ourselves. Lastly, it turns out we're really, really lazy. We're really, really lazy. We want to come into the workforce on a first day at work, talk about, can I come in a little late? Can I take a longer lunch? And can I leave early to play with my friends? Right? That's what we think about. Now, I was thinking about this for my own life, and I thought, am I lazy? And I had a thought, maybe it's about the technology, right? Maybe it's a technological thing that's made us a little lazy. And a couple weeks ago, I was at my parents' home. They're moving across the country. And my mother was trying to get rid of all this old stuff. And she pulls out this box of VHS tapes, okay? You remember those? And she pulls out this box of VHS tapes, and she says, do you want these? And I said, no. And she said, why? And you know what my answer was? I have to wait for them to rewind. I mean, I said, I don't want them. And so, sorry, but that's kind of, right? We're a little lazy. And the last is, and this is a tough one, we have a sort of struggle in terms of launching. We have a failure to launch. More millennials between the ages of 18 and 29 live with their parents than live with spouses. So we have sort of this failure to launch. Now, you're sitting here wondering, Justin, why are you just trashing your generation? What's the purpose of this? In reality, I could probably fill 2 other big idea speeches about the stereotypes and generalizations I found about Gen Xers and the baby boomers. There's plenty. There's plenty of examples of that. And yet, what I want us to consider a little bit is, are the categorizations and the stereotypes really that valuable? Think about what we teach in Crucial Conversations and Accountability. We talk about labeling. We talk about the villain story and how we put people in those labels. It drives a lot of negative behaviors on our end. So not only do I think some of these categorizations are unhelpful, but sometimes they're just flat out wrong. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, Justin, I mean, have you looked at the news? Have you read some of the newspapers? I mean, it's all over the place about your generation. And maybe you're thinking about this article, the article that talks about the generation gap, and obviously is an important thing happening. But this article is actually from Life magazine in 1968. Or maybe you're thinking, I don't know, though, Justin, I mean, you guys really are about me. I mean, I've been reading all about how you're the me generation. From New York Magazine in 1976. Or maybe you're thinking of this example here, this article all about how the generation is an incessant need to videotape themselves doing everything. From 1985 Newsweek magazine. What am I saying? This is a part of being a young person. I think for the last number of years, it is a part of the society for the older people in the society to say that the younger people are selfish, self-involved, and a little entitled. This is nothing new. This is nothing new at all. And so what I want to do is challenge one specific stereotype. This is where my big idea comes in. One that is very common and yet I think is important to what we're going to look at in terms of millennials. Before I explain it and before I argue against the stereotype, I need you to know how much of a risk I'm taking. This is going to be so bold, so provocative, that I might just lose my participation trophy that they already gave me for showing up today. So I just want you to know that I'm taking a huge risk. I'll have to ask Emily if that's the case. And it's this. I believe that my generation might be the greatest generation of communicators we've ever had in the workplace. I'm going to let that marinate for a second. I'm going to give you 10 seconds, and I want you to turn to the person next to you and say the first thing that came to your mind. 10 seconds, ready, go. Okay, let me have you stop. Now, all I need you to do to participate in this is simply raise your hand. If you thought something to the effect of, that's a load of crap, raise your hand. Okay, yeah, wow, that's a lot of you. Okay. Now let me ask 2 more questions and raise your hand. If I said that and you thought something like this, raise your hand. Something like this? Can we all get together to socialize? Okay. The last one, if you thought something like this, raise your hand. The father's turning to the mother saying, darling, you're going to have to text your son to see if he wants some more potatoes. Raise your hand if you thought something like that. Okay, some of you. This is kind of ridiculous for me to say. you're probably thinking, when I think of millennials, I think of young people, I think of disconnected and distracted. That's what I think of when I think of millennials. You think of us on our phones all the time. But I want to flip that around a little bit. I want you to think about it. Is distraction a millennial problem, or is that a human problem? And is this idea that we're becoming more distracted, is that a change of generations, or is it a change of technology? It's kind of interesting to think. Now, let me be clear. Could my generation be less distracted? Absolutely. But couldn't we all? Something to consider. Now, this is kind of a bold thing for me to say, and I could go into a variety of different areas talking about why I think my generation, they're pretty effective at communicating. I could talk about the fact that we communicate quicker. We're able to assimilate information online and very quickly come up with decisions and move it towards the decision makers. We even hate meetings so much, we'd rather just quickly have the conversation over a text so we can move forward and do real work. We hate meetings. I could talk about a variety of these things. And yet the one that I really want to focus on is this. As I was reading through some of the research, one of the biggest complaints that I heard or I read about from baby boomers and Gen Xers, our managers, is this idea that many of us, millennials, when we came into the workforce, were making requests on day one about our hours, about our benefits. We were talking about when are promotion opportunities coming up, right? We even started to give ideas for the strategy of the company, and we've done nothing. We've accomplished nothing. And this bugs the heck out of our bosses, our baby boomer and Gen X bosses. Why? Because that's not the norm. The norm is, up to this point, that you shouldn't be speaking up like that and asking for things and sharing ideas until you have some sort of positional power in the organization, until you've done something. And your job is to take your lumps, do what you possibly can, and when you've accomplished something and move into the right role, then you can start asking for those things. Then you can start making requests. Then you can start speaking up. But my generation's saying, no, we want to speak up now. And that kind of rubs people a little wrong. Here's a couple reasons why. That gentleman I was mentioning earlier, Mark Taylor, he said something interesting. He said, millennials are informal and often not constrained by that old-fashioned social expectation that might be ruling some of the reasons why we don't speak up in the other generations. He said that doesn't limit our directness. We're open, we want to be direct, we want to talk. And so, looking at that, you got to consider, just because we're confident, though, in speaking up, doesn't mean we're really good at it. That's the other part about this. Doesn't mean we're really good at it. And so that's where you come in. Because here's what you do as a trainer. It's so wonderful. We get into the classroom, and our job is really two things, I think. To improve someone's competence by giving them those skills and strategies to speak up or influence, but then also to improve people's confidence in their ability to use those skills. And what's great is sometimes when you give them the confidence goes up, but not all the time. 2 days is a very short time to shift someone's belief that they should only speak up if they're in a formal authority position. And so we have this thing we're fighting against in the classroom, constantly saying, you can do it, you should speak up, you should be confident to speak up. And yet now we have a generation of learners that are coming into the classroom saying, I'm confident to speak up now. And this is where you come in to help them, because we stink at it. We need some help. So I'm going to give you 3 tips that I've come up with looking at the research to help you better approach this and help the millennials to become what I think they can become. So if you have a pen and a piece of paper, I might write some of these things down. The first is couple our confidence with some competence, okay? Now, obviously, you're doing that really well in the formal training space, but one of the things I want you to consider is how can you add the informal mentoring to help us to be able to acquire some of those skills? The formal mentoring that we think of a little bit generally only benefits one side. The senior person gets together with a junior person, they teach them all they know, and the junior person does all the benefiting. But there's an interesting new movement. I don't know how new it is. Jack Welch talked about it 10 to 15 years ago, but I think it's getting some more popularity. And it's called reverse mentoring. It's this idea that you take a senior person and a junior person, you put them together, and the senior person helps that junior person with how to speak up and when to speak up and what it means to be a professional and those things about being on time and taking initiative and things like that. And we help you with stuff like this. That's what we do, okay? Or other things like that, right? Things like new innovations, technology, PR, right? Social media. There's a variety of skills and great knowledge that this young group has that can be of great benefit to a senior person. So consider, how can you couple our confidence with some competence and consider some opportunities for reverse mentoring as a way to do that? Second, understand our motivations. Okay, there I go again, being selfish. You have to understand me, just like him as a millennial. In crucial accountability, one of my favorite skills is make it motivating. And we talk about the key to motivation being making a connection between the behavior you want someone to do and something they already value. But that makes an assumption. It makes an assumption that you know what they value. And so one of the things you need to consider is, am I making the mistake of assuming that what I value is what they value? And some of you are wondering, well, how do I know what they value? I have a super secret tip for you that you cannot share outside this room. Ask. So just write that one down. Don't share it with anybody else. I have a boss that does this really, really well. At least twice a year, we sit down and have lunch, and she simply asks me, what are you interested in? What motivates you? What excites you? What do you want to do? And it does two things. It helps her know and manage me effectively. And secondly, think about the engagement. I will do anything to help her be successful because she cares so much about my motivations. And if you ask, you might be really surprised at what you find out. One thing you might be surprised to find out, the data shows that 50% of us will take less money to do work for a company that we think is having a greater impact on the world. Now, that's not permission, Emily, to give me a pay cut. Yeah, let's clarify. Let's clarify. She's writing that one down. That's her one takeaway from today. But you might find out an unprecedented amount of connection to mission. They're finding that our generation connects more to mission, cares more about mission than margin, more than you would have seen from any of the generations that came before us. Ask, and you might find out. Last year at REACH, Dan Pink came and shared some wonderful research and insights about employee engagement. Steve did a great job right now. And Dan Pink said something I'll never forget. He said, the key to employee engagement is two things. He said, it's high expectations and a lot of autonomy. And I think that when a lot of the other generations look at mine, they weep when they think of the future. They worry. They lower their expectations. They don't think much is going to get done. And I was talking to my friend Jamie, who's a trainer like you at Good Life Fitness in Canada. And they have an interesting employee population, 80% millennials, 80%. And yet, Good Life Fitness, year in and year out, is one of the top 10 most respected corporate cultures in all of Canada. I said, what do you guys do? This is an interesting employee population. She said, when we hire someone, we are very, 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 very clear about expectations. Very clear. And they're high. And yet we give them that autonomy. We work hard, we play hard, and once again, they're one of the most respected corporate cultures in all of Canada. To my Gen X friends and my baby boomer friends, I would invite you, please, don't lower your expectations. Raise them. Clarify them, but raise them. And maybe, just maybe, together, we can create the greatest generation of communicators this workforce has ever seen. Thank you.